France fell in 1940, and when it did, life didn't just change, it collapsed. Dinner tables became battlegrounds, food vanished, and in the majority of cases, rationing cards became more valuable than money. Every meal, every trade, every scrap mattered. Improvisation wasn't optional, it was survival. Bathtubs turned into rabbit pens, flower boxes became vegetable gardens. People improvised because they had to. This is Improvised France, a Brave Builds mini-series exploring the side of history most textbooks barely mention. Stories of hunger, clever solutions, and quiet courage that later fed into the French resistance. Subscribe and follow along. Each episode of this mini-series uncovers another piece of life in occupied France. Today we dive into how ordinary people endured when every day was a fight to eat and live. Even before German troops arrived, France was struggling. The First World War had scarred its farmland and drained its workforce. When war broke out again in 1939, 5 million French men were mobilized, leaving farms short of labor, factories undersupplied, and food production already faltering. After the armistice in June 1940, the country's division between occupied and unoccupied zones, combined with German economic exploitation, shattered what was left. 2 million tons of grain, 350,000 tons of meat, 300,000 tons of potatoes, 150,000 tons of vegetables, 300 tons of fruit, and 600 liters of wine were all shipped north to feed the Reich. Even chemical fertilizers were confiscated, cutting farm yields drastically. Cattle herds shrunk from forced slaughter quotas. Milk and butter nearly disappeared from the public. By October 1940, the New York Times reported that fields lay fallow, resources were stripped bare, and, quote, France faced one of the most severe food shortages in modern Europe. Rationing officially began in earnest in October 1st, 1940. By the following year, every essential item, bread, meat, cheese, fats, sugar, and chocolate, required rationing coupons. Rationing cards were divided by age, occupation categories like children, adults, elderly, heavy laborers, each with a specific calorie quota. A typical adult received between 1,200 to 1,300 calories per day, barely half the recommended intake. At first, potatoes were unlimited, but as shortages worsened, they too were rationed. Even rutabagas and turnips, once used mainly as feed for livestock, became dietary staples. In Limoges, the French Department of Normandy, part of the German-occupied northern France during World War II, rationing tickets were described as, quote, as precious as banknotes, end of quote. Authorities even banned the export of rutabagas from the department in 1941 to keep the food local to northern France. Yet even those meager rations rarely arrived in full to the people. Meat was often delayed or unavailable, bread was stretched with barley or chestnut flour, and edible fats were nearly impossible to find. Between August 1939 and July 1942, the cost of living in Paris rose by 65.5% and inflation jumped by nearly 50% since the start of the occupation. Grain prices doubled to even tripled. In the summer of 1942, while the French diet was cut by 12%, higher quotas were imposed for the German shipments, and occupiers demanded even more grain, meat, and fruit and vegetables and wine than before. Even some German administrators feared that these demands were excessive and could cause, quote, total economic collapse, end of quote. In Normandy, prices rose fivefold between 1940 and 1944, while the wages rose less than twice that rate. To make things even worse, the Germans enforced a punishing exchange rate of 1 Reich to 20 francs, allowing soldiers from Germany to drain much of the French markets for cheap and send the goods back home to Germany. It wasn't long before the ration cards lost their meaning and survival shifted to the black market. Paris, like many of other French cities, became a city of quiet defiance. By 1942, the black market flourished. Forged rationing tickets, illegal slaughterhouses, and stolen goods were traded through secret networks. Rationing tickets were printed in different colors each month to try to combat this counterfeiting that was running rampant. Ordinary people turned to System D, from débrouiller, meaning to get by or figure it out. This concept wasn't born during the war, but it became a philosophy of survival under the occupation. Fuel shortages left Parisians freezing in their apartments. Official archives record home temperatures reaching near 0 degrees indoors during winter of 1944. I think that's 0 degrees Celsius. And so these people adapted. Families raised rabbits or chickens in basements or balconies and turned window boxes into vegetable patches. Some even turned to raising guinea pigs as a meat source and a trading commodity. And city dwellers foraged parks and countryside outskirts. Even ornate and famous gardens saw plots that were once beautiful turned into vegetable gardens as a matter of survival. Every day became a small act of resistance, finding food the Germans hadn't taken and keeping that food from them. In rural Normandy and Brittany, self-sufficiency gave a slight advantage. Families cultivated gardens, raised rabbits, and bartered eggs, milk, or vegetables for grain or fuel. But even the countryside suffered. The French government and German authorities seized large portions of rural output, grain, milk, and meat, while production itself fell by about 40%. Wheat harvests dropped from 7.3 million tons in 1939 to just 4.2 million tons by 1945. And potato production fell from 14.4 million tons to only 6.1 million tons. Fertilizer shortages further reduced yields as chemicals and fuel were exported to Germany. Still, the countryside had one key advantage: the woods. Hunting was an integral part of French culture, never entirely stopped, despite orders from the Germans to surrender firearms. Many hunters hid their weapons and quietly kept the tradition alive. That hunting culture not only helped sustain rural families and provide meat, it preserved vital skills and weapons that would later reappear in the hands of the resistance and the Maquis. Behind the numbers and the policies were millions of small human acts of defiance. Mothers trading jams for potatoes, farmers hiding sacks of flour from the Germans, city workers sharing rabbit meat with neighbors to circumvent rationing. Survival itself became resistance. The French called it le débrouille. Making do, fixing, reusing, and outsmarting the system. The same ingenuity that would later fuel the resistance and help them succeed. This mini-series has been a long time coming, and I'm so excited to finally get to share it with you. Check out the description for the resources I used if you want to dive deeper. Next time in the Improvised France series, we'll explore clothing and textiles, how everyday garments were affected by war, and how people adapted to survive. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe and hype button and like the video and drop a comment. It helps more people discover these stories and join the conversation. This is Brave Builds, where history, kit, and reenacting come together to help us build a better understanding of their bravery, because their story deserves to be remembered.